Welcome to the Salt of the Earth podcast. My name is Jonathan Cobb, and this is my co-host,
Thomas Pope.
And we're here today with our third episode of the Salt of the Earth podcast. So, our theme for today is finding purpose without God, and also how you can find purpose with God, too.
Right.
Kind of how that whole trade-off works with, as far as how you can't find purpose without God and what the purpose you find with God is.
And what we should do about it.
Yes.
But before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about a video that I did this week, which is actually my first video since when I was doing this before by myself.
Yeah. And so the topic for that is very fitting. You kind of tied that in.
Diligence.
Yeah.
Being diligent.
So do you want to... I haven't really looked at the script too much. If you want to just kind of, I don't know, go over the synopsis of the video or something.
Right. So, and I mentioned some of this in the video. Just kind of a quick recap is, since we started talking about wanting to make videos again as a joint project and stuff, I started thinking about diligence and, questioning, was it diligence that was the reason why I haven't made any more, or was it, umpteen other things? And so I just kind of wanted to look in the Bible and see what it had to say about that. And it led down quite a rabbit hole, a lot of different thoughts, and this is just kind of like me skimming off the top, really.
Yeah.
So what I really wanted to answer for myself was essentially the question is how can I know and be convicted about a lot of things that I should do, things that are good that I should be doing, or things that are bad and I shouldn't be doing. How can I know that and be convicted about that and yet still go on not doing them, basically? That was kind of the question that I wanted to answer for myself. And through the end of the video, I mean, it hasn't really been answered yet.
It's a very, very big question.
Which is why, I mean, I could have had this video done like a week or so ago if it was just straight cut and simple, but it ended up not being that way for me because it got beyond just talking about diligence, really. It started talking more about, what is my real focus in life, here's what I say, but if I'm not doing it, is the thing that I'm saying really me, and even getting into whole thoughts of this kind of battle between two natures of the spirit and the flesh, am I doing things, am I living for spiritual reasons or fleshly reasons, It got into all of that, which is why it ended up being like I said, the video that actually gets released is just me kind of skimming off the top, and I'm going to have to probably have another one.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that part of it was examining yourself as far as why do I not do the things that I ought to do, and why do it. I think there's a verse about that, but
well, yeah, and I thought of that verse too. It's in Romans 7, if you want to know.
Okay, yeah, but anyway, so it's a really big question because I think because we obviously, as Christians, we know that we're supposed to do certain things, and we all fall short at some point. And
so I mean, it's much bigger than diligence. Really, it's kind of a question of Christianity in general, or our focus in general. Kind of the purpose of this channel, right, is trying to do more. Is that somewhere along the line we have to ask ourselves, are we devoted to the level that we should be? Are we doing the things that we should be doing? Are we just kind of getting by, kind of
Mhm.
living a lukewarm life, but then telling ourselves that we're pretty good. Because when I start asking myself these questions, that's kind of what I see is kind of like, you know, here I thought I'm pretty good, but if I'm really examining it, if I'm really asking myself these questions, you know, maybe it's called into question.
Mhm. And yeah, I guess I think I probably agree with you as far as like the- if you really analyze yourself, you start to wonder how on track you actually are when you analyze it, which I guess is probably good for all of us to do more often. But and I think a lot of it about discipline, a lot of it comes down to like everyday self-disciplinary actions like setting routines and stuff and making rules for yourself. So that's part of it. Then the other part of it is, I don't know, I guess we probably all need a daily motivation of some sort.
Mm-hmm. So
Um,
yeah. So just looking at it from the aspect of diligence and discipline, there's a list of fairly simple, routines or patterns that we can kind of put into place, kind of habits that we can create to solve that part of it. But then that doesn't necessarily solve the deeper issue.
the motivation.
It's like we can become very disciplined. We can become very diligent at doing anything, whether it be, just a physical everyday thing or whether doing spiritual tasks. But, there's still the deeper, the motivation behind it and the reason, I guess, which is a little bit harder to get to.
Yeah, and I think another reason that it's easier for us to fall away from diligence is distractions.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of worldly distractions we have. Because you're mentioning part of the reason about stopping making videos. And your life has been around that time was pretty busy. I'm guessing because you had a lot of stuff going on as far as you were in school, you're just newly married and stuff like that. So
Yeah, you could ask just about anyone over the last year, and they'd probably say that their life has been kind of busy or hectic or out of whack in some way. So there were a lot of things, but at the same time, the fact that there were other things can't really justify the fact that I didn't do certain things. And it's not like I have to make videos, and if I don't make videos, then I'm being a terrible person.
But it is something you wanted to do and didn't do it, even though you wanted to do it.
Right, and it's like something I could have done, but there's two routes. I can either just kind of blame my circumstances, or I can take responsibility and say that the reason I didn't do it is because I obviously had other higher priorities.
Yeah, but the point I'm making is that like we all have distractions, and I guess part of being diligent people is to learn how to eliminate distractions. I guess
Mm-hmm.
how to deal with that.
Which is, I guess, is something that I talked a lot about in the video. Is kind of the point I got to just from looking at a couple of the passages that I looked at, was that eliminating distractions is something that's pretty important, because once you do that, then you have a lot more breathing room to establish the good habits that you want to establish.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking from a spiritual perspective, which is really, when I originally started thinking of diligence, it was mostly as like, here's all these physical things that haven't been done, but really the main significance of it is then changing and thinking about spiritual diligence. When you think of that, spiritual distractions are what cause most people to, to not do what they're supposed to be doing, to fall away, to live lukewarm lives. I think about like the parable of the sower. You have the thorns, and the thorns are the people who are distracted by all the things of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's those distractions that choked them out and basically completely prohibited them from being being the Christians they were supposed to be, from sharing the gospel, from even just living their own lives.
Yeah. I've been dealing with that a little bit lately because I have different things going on. Is like like an uptick in business, and my business is it's can be distracting. It's easy to kind of get engrossed in something like that, and so it could be good things or it could be bad things that happen in your life that feel urgent and important, and it's really easy to get distracted from different things that you want to do and you think you should do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard.
I think, and maybe this is why it ended up kind of turning into a bigger issue, a lot more thoughts for me, is that I think the reason is that is one of our major challenges as Christians is breaking human nature, which is to take the easy path, which is to just kind of do whatever we feel like doing, avoid hard things, do things that are easier, things that are more instantly gratifying, and at the expense of things that have longer term benefits. I think that's one of our primary challenges as Christians, is just rising above that and just thinking on a different level, pretty much, is thinking the ultimate long term, which is heaven.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's. Hold on.
So just a quick little kind of recap on the video I made. It's going to be a short video probably. Probably less long than we've been talking about it now.
Yeah, well, that's same with last week.
It's just how it goes.
Yeah. Do you want to read some of the... I guess we could read some of the verses from... or the verse that you have in there.
Sure. I guess it doesn't matter too much which one we read. So one of the passages I highlighted was 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27, which says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. But I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I preach to others, I will not be disqualified myself." So I guess the main thing that I got out of that was just the attitude of putting your all into it,
Yeah. We do everything. Should do everything with intention, like, as he said in 26. Therefore, I box in such a way as not beating the air. Everything we do should be done with intention, and also, but I discipline my body and make it my slave. What I get out of that is, all of us have a human nature that wants us to chase after the next thing or whatever pops up in our life and pursue that, which is very tempting, so that's why we have to discipline our bodies, so that we are trained to override the instinct to go after this or that and stay focused, because there's a lot of things that can pop up really fast, that especially good things that something you want to go after, something you want to do, something that could be fun, it could be a career opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of different things that could pop up really fast, and you feel a sense of urgency to go do that. But we need to have control over our emotions in there too.
And beyond that too, it's not just exercising complete self-discipline and being able to force yourself to do one thing or another. It's it's thinking it's the flesh, the attitude, versus a more spirit-focused mentality. The mindset on this flesh wants to do the things of the flesh. So that person is going to be a lot more prone to being distracted and to chasing after fleshly things. And I guess the ultimate goal is for us to have a more spiritually focused mind and attitude, and not want those things as much. And so yeah, the one of the main things I got from this passage was just the attitude that Paul writes in, really, is that, you're running in such a way that you may win. You're not just doing it, you're not getting by, you're not putting the minimum in. You're in this for the prize, and I think that's how we should live.
You should not be satisfied with good enough.
Live with a sense of urgency for spiritual things, for a change. Rather than
because the thing about distractions is they always seem urgent, but there's a lot of verses about how our walk with God is urgent because God can come back at any time. And so I guess that's a perspective shift we have to take as far as, distractions seem urgent, but so is our walk with God. It is urgent.
It is more genuinely urgent.
It's more important, and it's urgent, because distractions are like, these are urgent, I can do these, but I still have time to make sure my walk with God is good. But that's also urgent, and it's more important.
And there's several times when Paul does this kind of thing, and I really like it every time he does it, is he kind of he uses figure of speech to kind of compare our walk with God as some other, some physical, struggle or action, whether it be boxing or running, or sometimes I think he compares us to being like soldiers. And so Paul uses these words, run a race, and he does similar things in several other passages where he compares our walk with God to some physical kind of struggle, whether it be running a race or boxing, or I think at a time he uses the metaphor of us being soldiers, things like that. I really like when he does that because it's something fairly relatable,
Yeah.
You think about running a race, and that's something that's pretty urgent, If you're actually running in a race, a competitive race or something, you're not just going to kind of mosey along at whatever pace knowing that eventually you'll get there, right? It wouldn't make sense. That would be kind of against the point of being in the race. So he uses that, saying like, no, you need to do this as if you're in a race. You're trying to get first place. You're not just trying to get to the finish line, right?
Which we all get there because we all die.
Yeah, well, the finish line is death, and we will all get there, but we won't all receive the prize.
Yeah. It just gives us a sense of the fact that we should not let anything distract us, because if you let something distract you while you're racing, obviously you're not going to win if you're distracted. And so it's the same thing. That's the level. That's the seriousness of this. Is that it's so serious that we need to be diligent. We have to be diligent.
Which reminds me, I was wasting time on YouTube recently, and I watched a video where it was a bunch of clips of different sports teams and things where they prematurely celebrated, where they thought they were going to win or something. And one of them was a guy running in a race. I don't know what kind of race it is, some sort of sprint or dash, or I don't know my running terminology.
Yeah.
But here he's about to cross the ribbon, and he kind of puts his arms out and not really slows down, but just that little bit kind of slows him down enough, and then somebody else runs through the tape,
Yeah.
So here he thinks he's about to win, and then you can see that he sees in his peripheral vision this other guy, and he looks to his side and he's like, what? And the other guy runs through the tape. So just think of that,
Yeah, that's a distraction. Yeah.
We can, and thinking spiritually, we can think that we're winning, and then we actually end up not winning.
I guess the analogy there would be if we get too full of ourselves, it could distract us.
And just don't be confident that you have it.
Well, Yeah,
Well,
but
okay. You should be confident, but don't be like self-assured.
don't be don't be full of yourself as far as like it's not by your power that you get this, it's by God's grace. And so we shouldn't celebrate our wonderful goodness that we made it to heaven, because that's not how that works. It's so that's kind of the analogy with that video, is that he's like, oh, I'm winning, and
Nope.
distracted himself.
Mm-hmm. So, any other thoughts on my video?
Well, I'm sure it'll be a good video. I haven't really done much editing on it yet, so it's hard to say. But
So, let's get to kind of, I guess, what is our main topic of the night, which is finding purpose without God, or I suppose there could be a lot of ways that it could be worded.
yeah,
Essentially, how do people find purpose when they don't believe in an eternity without a God, and what that kind of looks at, what that would look like from our point of view?
basically the synopsis, in my opinion, is that they don't, but they deceive themselves into thinking they do.
So they don't actually have purpose, but they think they have purpose.
Yeah, I wrote a little short segment. If you don't mind me reading it.
Go ahead.
It's not very edited. It's just kind of something that I thought to say. Sometimes it's easy to forget that there's no purpose in life without God. You can find many examples of non-Christians who seem to have their life together, and it can make you wonder if they have it all figured out. Without a faith in God, is faith really necessary? I'm starting to realize, though, that this is merely a temporary illusion. This illusion could last many years, however. It could even last half a lifetime, but it's still temporary. I believe that everyone, if they really think about it, will come to the conclusion at some point that there is more to life than what this world has to offer. There has to be an intelligent creator. I think non-Christians avoid this in two main ways: distractions and denial. It seems that non-Christians will often try to distract themselves, or let themselves be distracted, with the pursuits of this world in order to avoid the thought of our ultimate fate on earth, death. Non-Christians also often go into denial in order to avoid the thought. I believe denial is part of what brought about theories of evolution. At that time, there was an accepted view of the beginning of time, but because of man's denial towards God, they tried to come up with alternate theories to avoid acknowledging an all-powerful God. But at the end of the day, every person at some point will still think about the purpose of life. As Christians, we have a hope and a purpose, but non-Christians don't by default. They struggle to find purpose in this world, but it is all temporary, meaningless.
Okay. So yeah, you make the point that basically, in your view, if you don't believe in God, you're either in a state of denial or you're distracting yourself to avoid that thought.
Yeah. We're not being. I don't think people are being honest with themselves.
So they're just kind of.
But they don't think about it really.
They don't really think about it, because to think about it would be kind of, by definition, against what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because if they were actually thinking about it, then, well, who knows?
Because you can hear many stories of non-Christians who just started to think about their life and they ended up becoming Christians just because they were brutally honest with themselves and just thought through, okay, what's the end goal here? But most people don't do that, I feel like, in my experience with this topic.
It's a very rare thing for someone to be completely honest with themselves and then be willing to change in accordance with that honesty. And that's true of anyone, Christians or non-Christians alike. And especially when it's as big of a change as completely swapping, your worldview and everything, and admitting that there's a God and everything, is that's not a small change. That takes both a lot of a lot of honesty and a lot of I don't know, humility,
Yeah.
which
Yeah. Humility.
are not always very common. Um,
Yeah. And I've been reading about this, or about people defending or talking about evolution, as far as defending and opposing it, or the theories of evolution. And I just thought about, back when Darwin created his theories, at that point, creationism was fairly accepted. It seems like,
mm-hmm.
and I might be reading into the lines a little bit here, but I think it's safe to say that Darwin was. I believe he was an atheist at that point, right?
I don't know.
I believe he was an atheist, and so he's reverse engineering a theory to go along with his beliefs. So basically, he was trying to come up with a theory that would fit his worldview, which to me it is a good example of denial. Like, you should, instead of looking at,
it's circular reasoning.
Yeah.
It's because of this other thing has to also happen. So because I don't think that there's a God, there also has to be another explanation for why there isn't a God,
there has to be a creationist story that doesn't involve God, and so I think that's a good example of how people go into denial about. And the more common thing is distractions. Christians and non-Christians alike will allow themselves to be distracted, and that will cause them to avoid thinking about or coming to terms with their faith.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely something that I've noticed and thought about a lot, is that it's a painful thought to think about death and to think about what is going to happen when I die, right? When any person dies. And it's kind of a question everyone has to confront, but I think a lot of people kind of live their lives kind of avoiding it, more or less.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily always avoiding the idea of God or no God, but they're avoiding the idea of the question, what happens to me after I die, right? And so they kind of stumble through life just trying to forget about that and trying to enjoy life to as best as they can, and then they get towards the end and then they're absolutely afraid because they still don't know. They still haven't thought about it. They still haven't done anything about it. So that's definitely, I think that's kind of a cycle a lot of people are in, where it's just, death is a painful thought, and so I will not think about it. I will do something that is less painful and is more fun.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, I think it's unfair, and I don't think we can just go ahead and say that everyone, all non-Christians, are either distracting themselves or in a state of denial, because while to some extent it might be true. See, I just went online and I just read a bunch of kind of perspectives of how do people deal with purpose? How do they find purpose without God, right? That was kind of some of my research, and what I found is that a lot of people are actually able to achieve a certain degree of peace and kind of purpose without God. They can fully accept the fact that they're going to die one day, and then at the same time they can just kind of be happy with their lives. So I have seen examples of that where they're just kind of where they kind of find a way to be content, in other words.
Yeah.
But and in that case, it's really all a matter of finding or creating a purpose to, live for. For some people, it's, science or technology or family, kids, things like that. And that's what people live for. And they can be fairly content in doing that.
Yeah. So I guess there is purpose outside of Christianity, but the point I should make is that all the purpose outside of Christianity is purpose-based in this world, which is temporary
Mhm.
and
So-
it's
and so-
corrupted.
And so people who have come to kind of be content and have a sense of purpose, they're thinking essentially for their life. They're just going to, they're kind of forgetting about the fact that one day they'll die, and then, whatever they did won't really have made much of a difference. They're thinking more of, well, while I'm here, I'm just going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy myself as best I can. And really, that's one of the better, I guess that's one of the better mentalities you can take if you're not going to believe in God, is
Yeah.
just enjoy life, I guess.
Or some people will say that they're going to try to leave this world a better place. That's a pretty common answer, or a pretty common thought.
They're working towards the next generation's betterment.
Yeah. And so there is a lot of good that can be done outside of a belief in God. A lot of good. But it's still, it's meaningless without, putting purpose in this world is meaningless no matter how good it is, because this world is a corrupt place. And so nothing you can do in this world will stop evil, which is the driving power of everything bad.
And in the end, it, depending on how pessimistic, or you could call yourself realist, you want to look, all is meaningless, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we're talking about this, if you want to kind of think of like the biblical like guidebook on this entire subject, would be the book of Ecclesiastes, which is, it's a fantastic and wonderfully depressing book, which is just basically King Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, just basically realizing one by one that everything is meaningless.
Yeah. See, King Solomon was incredibly wise, and he was very honest with himself. And so that's the natural conclusion to come to.
And he basically just was miserable in some ways, because he just couldn't escape the fact that, all these pleasures that I've been chasing, this thing and that thing, and I'm super rich and I have a ton of wives and stuff. It's just, in the end, though,
doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't. His words are, it's vain and striving after the wind. So yeah, Ecclesiastes is pretty much the guidebook when you want to think of finding purpose in life, and if we're actually gonna, if I just read a couple parts of it, it kind of has some of the same ideas that we've just been talking about now. So just a quick bit in Ecclesiastes 2:24 through 26. There is nothing better for man than to eat and drink and to tell himself that his labor is good. So essentially this is kind of, and Solomon repeats this thought basically throughout the book a few times, is that since it's all meaningless, basically just be content with your work, just be happy with eating and with the pleasures that you have, and just accept it. And drinking.
And I'm pretty sure he meant wine when he said drinking.
Eating and drink things that are good. just enjoy it. So that's basically, that's the conclusion he comes to, where, if you're thinking of from a temporal, when we're dead, we're just dead, everything's gone kind of perspective, that's kind of the view he gives as the best. But he continues here and says, but this also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting, so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. So Solomon sees that, just living your life and trying to be satisfied with whatever you're satisfied with, that's kind of like the best you can do. But even then, person can't really have, even that is from God, even the good things that we can experience, God has given to us, and if we're just looking at,
so even if we didn't know that there was a heaven, we would still see all the good things we have and accredit that to God.
I mean, not necessarily. There's a lot of people who don't accredit it to God, but
yeah.
When it comes down to it, Well, his thought is, this also I have seen that it is from the hand of God. And if I read, there's another passage that's pretty similar to this. Chapter 5, verses 16 through 20. This also is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus he will die. So what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Throughout his life he also eats in darkness, and with great vexation, sickness, and anger. Here is what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and to enjoy oneself in one's labor, in which he toils under the sun, during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he also has empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward. Right. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. So when I read that, he will not often consider the years of his life, that's most people. Most people don't consider death. They don't consider that because they're occupied with the gladness of their hearts. They're occupied with things that feel good, pleasures, and just kind of being content in as much as they can, But there's this idea where, from a worldly perspective, the best we can do is just kind of enjoy what we're given in life, right?
Yeah. And that was Solomon's view. And he was obviously before Christ. And so he didn't have... That was the best he could have as far as... There was no... Christianity wasn't invented back then. Or wasn't around back then, rather.
Well, I mean, they had Judaism. So he had his way of gaining purpose from God, which he gets to at the end of the book. But at least from what he was saying is instead of striving for all these things, don't make them the purpose of your life, but when you get right down to it, it is all, in the end, vain and striving after the wind.
Yeah. But I think there is a good takeaway that can be brought out of, what Solomon is saying is basically how a non-Christian could see it as far as.
Yeah.
And although it's not necessarily bad, it is still not, it's still lacking. And I mean, that's what Solomon says himself. It's a good philosophy, but it still has its holes. Basically, I think is basically what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's all, there's nothing more to this. It's empty. But I think there is something that we can take out of this. Or when we, for me personally, I find it easy to forget that people that are non-Christians that look like they have their life all together, to forget that their life is not all together. And I think that can be an issue because that removes the incentive to think about ministering to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it also can remove the incentive to stay a Christian yourself, or to see the value in Christianity yourself. Because if your life is whole without God, then why do you need God?
Right.
And so, but I think we need to realize that that's an illusion. And I think most people come to a point in their life that they come to terms with that.
And that's something that I think both Solomon and Ecclesiastes and in a few of the Psalms, different psalmists kind of mention, is that here the righteous, are living in poverty and, they're having very hard lives. And then the wicked are living these, wonderful, glorious, they look really fun kind of lives. And, people throughout the Bible have just kind of asked, like, how can this be,
Yeah.
and almost also kind of questioning, almost like, did I make the right choice in doing this? You know, but then in the end they realized, well, in the end, they are not actually going to be better off.
They died just the same way.
And then after that, then God judges for everything.
Yeah. But anyway, it's good for us to remember that that non-Christians do not still have a hole in their life, because I think as humans we all long for a sense of purpose, and if we don't remember that we should remember that we have it. We as Christians possess what everybody in the deepest part of their heart longs for at some point. And we shouldn't forget that because we should be proclaiming, in light of that, we should be proclaiming to the world, we have it. We have the purpose that does not change with the world's events. We have a purpose that is not temporary. It's not influenced by evil. Everlasting and eternal. It's not, even if the world was to catch on fire, our calling is still here. We still are.
Our lives could be radically changed, or our physical lives, our exterior lives could be radically changed by something, and in theory we could continue on just all the same. And if you look throughout the New Testament, that's what was being happen to the first century church, is that Christians were being killed, their property was being stolen, all these things were happening, and yet they were still doing it joyfully,
Mm-hmm.
And
so basically, as Christians, we have a purpose that is not bound by the boundaries of this world, by the boundaries of this life, by death, by anything that can happen to us here on earth. Our calling, our purpose supersedes all of that. And so from that, we can realize that no matter what happens to us, be it persecution like the early church had, be it death, anything that can happen to us does not thinking, or as somebody has written somewhere, do not be afraid of the one that can kill your body, but be afraid of the one that can steal your soul. Basically,
I think that's in Luke and probably a couple other places, but
yeah, basically, we do not be afraid of anybody because we have a purpose that is our calling is not stopped by death. It's not stopped if this world bursts into flames. It's whatever people can do to us here on earth does not affect it. And I think it's important for us to remember that, because if we live in light of that, I think that can give us many. I think that we should be full of joy if we fully recognize that, if you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we do not have to worry about anything that could happen to us, and so that's where everlasting joy should come from.
And it's a very different perspective than most of us even have. Than I would say than even I have on a daily basis. It's not this this mentality of necessarily that the physical things, you shouldn't just be afraid about them. You shouldn't get caught up in them. You shouldn't worry about them. It's not something that we often have, even though that's kind of what we should have when we think about it.
Yeah, but if we really think about the fact that we are not bound by anything on this earth, there's nothing that we should worry us at all. I think that's where joy comes from,
Mm-hmm.
is the realization that we are invincible to this earth. We do not have to worry. And so I think if we all were to consider that daily, or consider that more often, that would increase our joy factor.
Quite possibly, I think so. Not pulling our joy from just trying to live our lives as contently as much as we can, kind of like Solomon mentioned, but really pulling our joy from something longer lasting, something more eternal, something that does not go away when we don't have all the physical things that we're used to having, right?
Yeah.
It's a deeper joy, a deeper peace, and I've talked with people about this before, like, and we've kind of discussed, is it possible to have something, to really have joy, to really have peace when you don't believe in God? And kind of the answer we landed on was yes, but it's not going to be as full, as
Well,
deep as it will be with God.
yeah. Well, the peace you can have is the peace that no matter what happens on this earth, you will die. So
When you get down to it, most people probably wouldn't word it that way.
well, it's like it's okay because we all die one day. So if you want to have peace in that, sure.
Yeah, some people, there's a few out there who the idea of death comforts them, despite the fact that they don't believe in God. And
I can really see that is because, like, no matter how bad things are going for you on this earth, it doesn't matter because
it's only a bullet away.
Yeah, you die and then everything, like, no matter what happened to you on earth, it does not matter anymore.
Clean slate.
Yeah, clean slate that's also non-existent.
No more slate.
But so, yes, you can take peace in that, or you can get peace from that. And I'm sure that your discussion was not, they didn't word it like that at all. But
yeah, well, I mean, the people I was talking with were Christians, but that's essentially the answer we came up with is that people who do not believe in God, they can achieve that kind of thing, but it's never going to have the fullness or the depth that otherwise it could with Christ. It's just like so many things where, Christ is just kind of that missing link where if you don't have God, you can't really have the fullest of a relationship or a marriage or anything like that. It's just he's just kind of this. It's just kind of this element where, yes, it can be good without, but it can't be the best.
yeah. Well, I think it comes down to the fact that if the only thing you care about is on this earth, then you don't care about anything stable. Because as they say, there's only two things that are stable on this earth.
Death and taxes?
Death and taxes. And so if you only care about those things, then obviously you could find peace in that. But you can find happiness in different things, good things that can happen to you on this earth, but nothing is stable besides death and taxes.
You mentioned a verse about not fearing anything on earth but the one who has the power to cast your soul into hell or something like that. I think that's the verse in Luke anyway. But that reminded me of a verse in Psalms that I memorized once. It's Psalms 56 verses 10 and 11. In God, whose word I praise, in God I have put my trust, and what shall I fear? For what can mere man do to me, or what can mere flesh do to me? Different versions, but essentially it's that same idea. Is that, well, if I'm trusting in God, what should cause me to be afraid? What is there to be afraid of anymore? Mm-hmm. It's a different perspective, and it's a great perspective to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
No more being afraid of COVID.
That's a big one.
No more being afraid of the fact that there's like 2 or 3 new strains currently circulating that the vaccine is not effective against. It's fun times. Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up that, but
I barely even heard about that, but it's okay. I don't really care. Yeah, as I say, it doesn't scare me. I'm not susceptible to COVID anyways. So,
So you had a few more notes here and a few verses. Do we want to go through any of those?
Yeah, let me look up Jeremiah 1:5. I think that was a good verse. right here. Where'd it go? There we go.
Welcome to the ASMR podcast.
It's not a bad idea.
Just us sitting here making a bunch of sound effects.
Slapping noises. So this verse is talking about Jeremiah, but I think it's still kind of cool to read because I sure it applies to all of us in one way or another. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. So this verse kind of talks to the fact that Jeremiah has a purpose in God. Before Jeremiah was even born, God had a purpose for him. And so...
It's a great thought.
Yeah. And so if you're ever unsure about what your purpose here on earth is, you can remember that God has a purpose for us. And so...
That reminds me, actually, on the Bible app, the verse of the day, which it goes right along with that. Hold on. I got to see where this is. This is Psalms 139, 13 and 14. For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. Just kind of along those lines of like...
Yeah.
It's very poetic speech. You wove me in my mother's womb, but, you know...
It reminds us that if God cares enough about us to masterfully craft us...
When we're at a completely helpless and, just useless state almost.
Yeah. If he cares about us that much, he's not going to put us here on earth just to sit and die, I guess.
I mean, we could choose to sit and die, but that's kind of our choice.
Yeah. He has a plan for us, and it's our choice to accept that plan. It's our choice to accept the quest.
And so we can just, in realizing that, we can just realize that, God's got control. He's got, it's all kind of worked out in the end. He has his greatest purpose, which is in our best favor if we choose to accept his offer. And he's gonna make it work out. As we have a small part that we have to play, and if we play it, then we get to be part of his greater purpose. You also had Romans 8:28, which goes kind of right along with this. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So,
yeah,
it's going to work out.
It's going to work out because, in the end, it's going to work out because if we follow God, we're all going to end up in heaven. So that's how it'll work out. And I'm sure you could be used on a more micro scale too, as far as that's probably what it might have been what the verse is intended for. But either way, God can work things out here on earth, and in the end, even if on earth doesn't turn out well, it'll work out in eternity.
I think the context in that verse is Paul's talking about sufferings in this present time and how essentially despite sufferings, the end goal is worth it. And well, just looking back earlier in the chapter, maybe a side note, verse 18, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. So it's just, yes, there's suffering right now, but it's not going to last.
Yeah,
and it's not comparable to the after suffering.
Yeah, we could look at this mathematically. How about?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so let's imagine a scenario where we're through, let's say, 5 years of suffering. What is that compared to eternity of glory. What's the equation there?
It probably involves math that I don't know.
Well, it doesn't involve math because it's not a math problem. But I think it's just a cool way to think about it because as humans, we like to use logic. But that's 5 years of suffering versus eternity in heaven. That's off the scales. That's out of our comprehension. And so, basically, what I'm saying is, no matter what happens to you on Earth, you can't even compare it. It's not even on the same scale as what the goodness
there stops being a scale once you start
going
considering infinity as a number.
Yeah.
Because you can't compare to infinity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the suffering on Earth is on a different, can't even compare to the goodness of heaven because the goodness of heaven it left the scale and it's off the scale basically.
Yeah.
It doesn't
through the roof, off the scale.
Yeah.
Much through the roof.
So, yeah, it's as if we look at it logically, it's not even a comparison. So, no matter how bad it is here on Earth, can't even compare.
And so we can either choose to try to make this Earth as good as we possibly can and to eliminate poverty and everything, or we can work towards the next one where we will actually be able to live in a perfect world, whereas here it's unachievable. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that we should ignore the poor. But
yeah, here's a good way to go about it, and I think if we were to be good at converting people to Christ, that would also help with things in this world. But but even more importantly, it would serve a higher purpose first.
Mm-hmm.
Converting or sharing the gospel it does both, but it serves your main purpose first. Because if you think about it, if there's a higher percentage of Christians in this world, all the bad things would start to diminish.
Mm-hmm.
But that would just be the side effect of the main point or
right.
the main purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you were to look at it as far as how to help this world, that's still your best bet.
Radio.
Yeah.
So, I guess what's the end point of this? What should we do about it? You know, what's something that we can go away from here and do and not just talk about it?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that we recognize that people in our life that may seem like they have it all together really don't. And we have what they're looking for, even if they don't know they're looking for it. And so I guess basically you shouldn't assume that people are fine. And therefore cause you to not share the good news.
Mm-hmm. And on a similar note, you shouldn't fall victim to the same kind of patterns of thought and traps that somebody who doesn't believe in God is, where you're not maybe asking yourself the questions of thinking about death or thinking about what happens to you after. Maybe it's not real enough for you. Maybe you're just kind of going through the motions, and you haven't really asked yourself if the way you're living is actually lining up with the belief that you say that you have.
Mm-hmm. I think that if we fully realize the purpose we have or the eternity we have, I think that probably should show through us in the form of joy and inner peace. And so I think those two things are kind of a symptom of the hope we have of eternity. And so I think we need to examine ourselves, and if we don't see joy in us, then that's probably an issue.
Mm-hmm.
That could
I'd say so.
be coming from bigger problems.
And another thing, which is very important, is as we're examining ourselves and asking ourselves questions, is we have to be honest with ourselves, which is equally true for Christians and non-Christians alike. It's not like once you become a Christian, then you no longer have to be honest with yourself. In fact, actually, you should probably be more honest with yourself, because now you're partway in the gate, but if you're only partway in the gate, then that might actually be worse off for you. So we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to ask ourselves questions like, am I living with the right motivations? Am I doing this for myself? Do I have the joy that I should be having? Do I fear or worry too much about the world? Things like this. We need to be asking ourselves these questions and honestly answering them, and then so that we don't fall victim to the same, to just kind of falling into a pattern and going through the motions, basically. Don't just create a spiritual routine.
Yeah. As there are some hardships I'm going through in my life right now, I realize that part of the reason, and I'm thankful for this, is that I realize I'm starting to see that I do have some inner joy in me, which is the reason I'm able to get through a lot of things. And obviously I'm still working on that to even be better at that, but it's sometimes hard to see until you have really in a rough spot. But as things that happen around me that can cause a lot of pain, starting to see that the joy that's within me is hopefully evident, hopefully evident to other people, and it's definitely helping me personally. So sometimes it's hard to see the joy you have until you're put through the fire, but
that's rejoice in your sufferings.
Yeah. But that's the point of that's the point of joy, is that it's not affected by your circumstances.
Right. Or it shouldn't be anyway.
If it is, it's not really joy.
If it is, you should maybe be asking yourself some more of those questions.
If it is affected by your circumstances, that's more like happiness and not really like joy. Joy is like,
right.
That's kind of the definition of joy.
We're not saying that the ideal picture of a Christian is someone who never mourns or is sad at things when they're hard or bad things happen, right?
Yeah.
Jesus wept, right?
Yeah.
he's the ideal example, and he cried lots of times. He was very sorrowful.
Not like lots of times.
Well, I guess we know of like at least minimum 2 or 3 or so.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a whole debate about, like, within the Christian community of whether men cry or not.
I don't think that's a thing within the Christian community. I think that's just men in general.
There's, but it's different than the Christian community because it's coming from more like because in the non-Christian community, it's like men should cry because that shows their.
Oh yeah, the current movement is definitely pushing for men to be more compassionate and emotional creatures.
Because if they're not, that's toxic masculinity.
Yeah, but
yeah, as far as Christianity goes, it's kind of I don't know. I'm still a little bit unsure how I fall in that debate, but I definitely do think there's a time and place. But
crying is therapeutic. That's my opinion.
That's an opinion.
It's medicine. But there is a time and place.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a little bit off topic.
Nothing's off topic if it relates to God. So, do we have anything else to talk about?
I think that we are fairly well wrapped.
All right. So today we talked about diligence. We talked about what diligence led to in my thinking, and then we talked about the finding purpose without God, and then we talked about men crying.
And we also talked about finding purpose with God.
And with finding purpose with God, which I guess I just mentioned the one because they kind of
We kind of compared those two.
Kind of follows naturally. You have to look at it from both sides of the coin.
Yeah, we kind of compared them and debated the pros and cons. Kind of.
Kind of. The one has a lot of cons, and the other has a lot of pros. Yeah.
So that's the verdict.
So we'll be having more videos soon. We'll have another one of these next week, Lord willing.
So.
And
that's it for the Salt of the Earth podcast, episode 3.
Be salty.